With a small crew and within a couple of weeks, we made a horror film for a company that produces puzzles that you can get for 10% off by using the code BROKEN, valid until the end of 2024. If you haven't seen the final film, then please take a moment to do so before we go behind the scenes. So, seeing as we got sent a set of these 3 puzzles and they happened to have a horror theme, it made sense for the film itself to have some horror elements. Of course, the film was supposed to show off the products as well, so the story structure was based around the way you would build the puzzle. Starting with the board, you lay out the pieces while using the included physical picture as reference, and once it's complete, you use these clamps to hold the board shut as you flip it to the other side for the surprise, which we won't spoil, of course. The main puzzle we went with was this haunted farmhouse, as I knew there was going to be a moment in the film where the puzzle came to life, and I thought this one had the most amount of elements I could animate, which I'll cover later in the VFX section. By the way, we only had one of each, so we cheated a bit by using another puzzle from the set that had similar colors for the part where she was putting them together, while the haunted farmhouse puzzle was already complete and put to the side for later use. For the location, we picked this cafe that had closed down 2 years ago, and it ended up being the perfect choice for this project because it's in my town, about a 5-minute drive away from our studio. It's on the first floor, so it was convenient for rigging outdoor lights. And because it had closed down 2 years ago, there was a bunch of dust and cobwebs, which worked in our favor to better serve the story. But we found this location about 2 days before shooting, so me and my cousin quickly scrambled to put together a shot list, which we barely managed to finalize on time, and I was even modifying it during the shoot. Another part that was very important to nail down was the acting, because there wasn't going to be any dialogue, so the person playing the role had to be able to give us the physical reactions in order to sell specific moments. So we were fortunate that we managed to secure Exona, a professional actress that has many years of experience in theater and film, and I'll leave links to her work in the description, alongside everything else that is mentioned throughout this video. The location was a bit of a mess, so a day before the shoot, we first settled on an area of the cafe we liked most, cleaned it up a bit, but not too much because the dust and cobwebs worked for the film, rearranged the furniture, and ended up using this piano that was just sitting there as the main table for our character, which looked so cool and stood out from the more generic background tables. The interior had warm tones in addition to the warm lights, so to contrast that, we chose a blue-colored outfit for the character, just to have her stand out from the environment. To add to that, the light coming from the outside was set to a blue color as well, mimicking moonlight. For the desk lamp, we ended up using an Aperture MC so we could control the intensity and use its effects. And to make sure it didn't die on us, we used one of these Came TV batteries with the USB-C port. Surprisingly, the built-in lights were dimmable, which was convenient as we were able to get the proper exposure for each shot, and you'll see how we use them later to add a lot of energy to the chaotic part of the film. The only challenge I would say we had with it was figuring out a way to rig the key light over top of the piano, because there wasn't really anything we could mount the light to right above, so we used a rope for a very sketchy but surprisingly stable solution in order to rig some clamps and hang an Amaran P60C with some extra diffusion. For the moonlight, we used an Amaran 300C from the tall windows side. We focused it with the curtains, and to accent the light rays, we used the haze machine, which I gotta say is a lot trickier to manage than I thought. You have to know how much haze to use and how often to reactivate it in order to maintain consistency throughout each shot. If you compare 2 frames from the same angle, but from different parts in the film, you can clearly see the difference, but because those shots are far apart in the edit, that it's not really a big deal. For the main camera, I used the Sony a7S III, which is usually rigged out with a cage and a few other accessories, a monitor on top to help with framing shots, and I was operating it solo, so pulling focus and all that. It was also the first time we used this CT12 tripod from Tilta, and I gotta say, it's a joy to work with high quality tripods. This one wasn't that heavy for the things it could do because it has carbon fiber legs, and the fluid head came in clutch, especially for those smooth pan and tilt shots we needed. We didn't quite manage to pair it up with a KMTV power dolly because the feet were a bit too big to fit, so for all the dolly shots we used a smaller tripod. Another specific moment in the film where we used the power dolly was during the time lapse. Because it is a motorized dolly, so I was able to set it to the slowest speed and have it move during the time that she was puzzling. I even used a low shutter to get this motion blur, which didn't affect the rest of the environment because the dolly was moving extremely slowly. We did an extensive review of the KMTV Power Dolly, so do check it out if you're interested in getting one for yourself. After the time lapse, we needed a way to jump time so we don't have to suffer through her trying to put the puzzle together. So we smash cut to this cobweb, which was just a chair that we raised on top of a table. And that's when we brought in the already completed puzzle and started taking out some pieces here and there so we could then just put them back in. Now for the chaotic part of the film, again, because we had the ability of tweaking the light intensity, we were just flipping them left and right the whole time, and we used the effects feature on all the film lights. To heighten those moments, we used an additional light coming in from outside to mimic lightning strikes. During this part, I went completely handheld, which not only allowed me to move faster and capture a variety of shots, but actually gave a lot of energy to that part of the film, which contrasted the static and smooth moving shots before that moment. It serves the story, and we're not going handheld without a reason. For the surprise reveal, we used another panel light on the board to mimic light coming from the flip side of the puzzle, but I actually forgot to use an effects preset to get some light flickering on her face, so I added that in post, which I think it worked out in the end. The top-down shot was the last setup we did. Even though it takes place earlier on in the film, we still shot it out of order for efficiency, so we didn't have to move gear back and forth. And very often we will shoot out of order to minimize setup times, but that also comes with challenges such as keeping track of continuity. Now I want to talk about a few fun editing choices. So one tricky part of the film was when she was putting the puzzle together. We didn't want that part to drag on for too long, but we had to keep in mind that building puzzles does take some time, so to portray a passage of time, I use these cross dissolves between multiple clips. In Resolve, you can do that by clicking on a cut point and hitting Ctrl+T. This will add a cross dissolve transition based on the default duration you have set under your user preferences. Other interesting editing techniques include scaling up some shots to hide something that wasn't supposed to be in frame, doing some digital zooms with the very convenient dynamic zoom feature, recomposing some shots for better framing, and to help with eye trace, I flipped this shot, which first of all doesn't make sense because it's a mirror, so it should show you a flipped view, but it felt a bit jarring to cut to the next shot of her holding up the last puzzle piece, because my eye was having to jump from one side to the other. I even did some visual effects straight in DaVinci Resolve, such as with this shot where I needed a flash of light from the thunder to help with the cut to the next shot. I simply added an adjustment layer on top, boosted the exposure of it in the color page, and then animated its opacity. I also had to fix some distracting movement on the bottom left of this shot because we were moving around behind the camera and didn't realize that a shadow was casting from the moonlight onto the table. So I just cropped over another layer of the same clip from a different point in time where there was no movement and feathered out the edges. For music, as with most of my other projects, I used Envato Elements, which is this video's sponsor. Envato provides a huge library of creative assets such as graphic elements and templates, stock footage, music, sound effects, fonts, and much more. On top of that, it offers unlimited downloads with an affordable subscription. So, if you're interested, I have provided a link down below in the description, which will take you to their website. And of course, if you do decide to register, I get to earn a commission. For over a year now, I've been using Soundly when it comes to sound design. You can search for a sound, simply make a selection, and drag and drop it into your editing software of choice, and that's it. This feature alone is the biggest reason for why I love Soundly, because you don't have to go and search for sounds elsewhere, download it, then import it in your editing software before you can even start making changes. For this film, because we were short-staffed, we skipped capturing sound on set. So first, I added a bunch of layers of Foley and realistic kind of sounds that matched what she was doing. But more importantly, we added some creative sounds that shouldn't really be produced by specific objects, but it made sense for the scene. For example, the board making a squeaky noise, matching sounds to accompany the different parts of the puzzle being completed, and for the surprise side, even though we don't see it, at least we get a hint at what it could be just by hearing it. Soundly also has this free audio plugin called Place It, which I used extensively to make the sounds blend better with the scene. If you want to go more in depth with how this software works, I have a couple of tutorials on my channel that you can check out. For color grading, I use this node tree for pretty much every shot. There are a couple of color space transform nodes to convert from log to Rec 709, some white balance tweaks, overall exposure, skin tones, because I really like having good looking skin tones. Made sure the blue of the shirt popped out from the rest of the frame for some color contrast, dialed down the reds a bit, denoised each shot a bit, even though this camera is a low light beast, so the original wasn't too bad either. Then some final passes, such as a LUT with a very subtle opacity, bloom and halation, and I used the relatively new built-in Film Look Creator plugin to give it an overall grade. Now, on to visual effects. For the house animation, a Photoshop file of the puzzle was sent to me, which I then prepared by separating objects into their own layers and using the clone stamp and patch tools for specific areas, such as with these birds, the windmill, and the wooden fence. Then I brought those into After Effects for animation. The turbulent displace effect did a lot of the heavy lifting to get a sense of wind blowing, so I added that to every flower and grass layer, as well as the barbed wire. But because the wood pieces were on a separate layer, I was able to give them some back and forth rotation. I used the wiggle and time expressions for turbulent displace and the log's rotation to procedurally animate them, same with the windmill. It just rotates infinitely. For the sky, I used stock footage elements from Envato and stole this lightning asset from a previous tutorial on this channel. The birds are also stock footage elements from various sources. I added some flashes of light inside the house with a bunch of layers and randomized their opacity. Some rain assets and some additional effects on top, such as contrast and glow, were used for some extra spice. I then pre-rendered that whole animation and composited over the top-down shot of the puzzle, which involved doing a transition from the real puzzle to the animated one with some alignment and masking. Rotoscoping the hand on top, which of course I love me some rotoscoping. I used this website to generate a vector puzzle pattern that I then used to break up the animation into pieces. Finally, I gave it some light flashes and a constant digital zoom back in Resolve. The only other visual effect was these pieces exploding on the second to last shot, and for that I used the shatter effect, which very conveniently has a puzzle pattern built in. It's a true 3D effect and it's only for a few frames, so it worked well enough. The final shot was originally planned to be done with visual effects, but we saved some time by throwing them for real. 3, 2, 1, and miraculously, we managed to retrieve every single one of those 500 pieces. Again, if you're into puzzles, then go ahead and browse their collection on flipsypuzzles.com and use the code BROKEN, valid until the end of 2024, to get a 10% discount. Alright guys, so that was pretty much the entire process of making this film. We had so much fun with it all, and I hope you did too, and learned something useful. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.